The reactor should have exploded 17 minutes ago. Every engineer aboard the battlecruiser Valorous Dawn knew it. Every officer had already accepted it, and most of the crew were already running to the escape shuttles. Deep inside the ship, alarms screamed through smoke-filled corridors as the reactor core tore itself apart. One containment ring had already failed. A second was seconds away from collapsing. When it did, 8,000 crew members would die, the ship would be ripped apart, and the entire sector would witness one of the worst disasters in modern galactic history. Which was why nobody could understand what they were seeing on the security cameras, because while everyone else was fleeing, one human janitor was fighting the reactor with a wrench. His name was Ethan Cole. For 7 years, he had been the invisible man aboard the Valorous Dawn. He cleaned maintenance decks. He repaired broken utility lines. He fixed problems nobody else wanted to touch. Most officers couldn't even remember his name. But on the day the ship began to die, Ethan did something no engineer, no commander, and no scientist was willing to do. He walked straight toward the burning reactor, while everyone else was running away from it. The aliens called it impossible. The experts called it hopeless. The evacuation order declared the ship already lost. But before this nightmare was over, one forgotten human janitor would save not only the ship, but thousands of lives that the galaxy had already written off as dead. 3 hours earlier, the Valorous Dawn floated above the planet Arcanis Prime. At nearly 6 kilometers long, it was one of the largest civilian transport ships in known space. Thousands of passengers traveled aboard it every month. Merchants, scientists, diplomats, families. To most people, it was simply another vessel crossing another trade route. But today was different. Today, the ship carried something extremely valuable. A diplomatic delegation from 5-star systems, including members of the Galactic Council. The mission was supposed to be routine, simple, safe. Nobody expected disaster, least of all Ethan. The human pushed his cleaning cart through Deck 12 while humming an old Earth song. Her cup of steaming coffee rested beside a bucket of cleaning solution. His blue maintenance coveralls were stained with grease. His dark hair showed hints of grey. A faded scar crossed one side of his neck. Most crew members never asked how he got it. Most didn't care. To them, Ethan was maintenance staff, background noise, someone who existed only when something broke. Exactly how Ethan preferred it. He liked quiet jobs. He liked predictable days, and after everything he had seen during his life. Quiet felt precious. A pair of young alien technicians passed him, neither bothered acknowledging him. They continued their conversation as if he wasn't there. Ethan smiled anyway. He was used to it. Humans remained rare throughout much of galactic space. Many species still viewed them as strange, primitive, overly emotional. Some even considered humans physically fragile. Compared to towering alien species capable of lifting vehicles or surviving extreme environments, humans seemed unimpressive. Ethan never argued. People tended to underestimate what they didn't understand, and he had learned long ago that being underestimated could be useful. Very useful. His wrist communicator suddenly beeped. "Ethan, Utility Junction 7, he sighed. "What's broken this time?" a voice replied. "Everything," Ethan laughed. "That's usually not a good sign. It definitely isn't." He grabbed his toolbox. 5 minutes later, he reached Junction 7. The moment he stepped inside, he frowned. 3 engineers stood around a damaged power regulator. One of them looked relieved when Ethan arrived. Finally, Ethan crouched beside the machine. The chief engineer, a tall, silver-skinned alien named Voren, crossed his arms. "We've spent 2 hours trying to fix this." Ethan looked at the damaged assembly, then looked back at Voren. "You tried replacing the control relay?" "Of course. You recalibrated the magnetic field?" "Yes." Ethan pointed toward a small, cracked conduit hidden behind the regulator. "What about that?" The room became silent. One engineer blinked. Another leaned closer. "Oh," Ethan smiled. "Yeah. Oh." 10 minutes later, the regulator was functioning perfectly. Voren stared at the repaired system. "You fixed it in 10 minutes. "Technically 5. The engineer groaned. "I hate you." Ethan laughed. "You hate that I charge by the hour." Even Voren smiled. Despite Ethan's low position aboard the ship, the engineering teams respected him because somehow the human always found solutions. Nobody understood how, including Ethan himself. He simply noticed things. Patterns, tiny details others ignored. His father had once called it a gift. His military instructors had called it something else, but Ethan hadn't thought about those days in years, at least not intentionally. Hours later, the ship entered orbit around Arcanis Prime. Everything appeared normal, until the first explosion. The blast rocked the vessel so violently that Ethan nearly fell from a maintenance ladder. Emergency lights instantly flooded the corridor, red flashing danger. Every instinct inside him awakened at once. He hadn't felt that sensation in years. The sudden sharpening of focus, the instant awareness, the certainty that something was wrong, very wrong. His communicator crackled. "All personnel report emergency status." Another explosion shook the ship. People screamed. Somewhere nearby, metal twisted. Ethan dropped from the ladder. His expression changed. The relaxed maintenance worker disappeared. Something harder emerged. Older. Dangerous. The voice over the intercom returned. "Unknown attack detected. All personnel proceed to emergency stations." Attack? Ethan frowned. Who would attack a civilian transport ship? His answer came 30 seconds later. A viewport revealed dozens of hostile vessels surrounding the Valorous Dawn. Weapons fire streaked across space. Explosions illuminated the darkness. The battle had already begun, and the Valorous Dawn was losing. Fast. Chaos spread through the ship. Passengers flooded evacuation corridors. Security teams rushed toward breached sections. Medical staff prepared emergency triage stations. The bridge desperately attempted to understand what was happening. Captain Rellan stood before the tactical display, his four eyes focused on incoming reports. How many enemy ships? 43 confirmed. The captain's face darkened. Impossible. A tactical officer swallowed. "Sir, they're targeting engines and power systems. Not passengers?" No. That worried him even more. Professional attackers, organized, deliberate. Someone wanted the ship itself, not the people aboard. Then another report arrived. The officer's face lost all color. "Captain." "What?" "The reactor." A pause. Then the words everyone feared. "Direct hit." The bridge became silent. Every officer understood the implication. The Valorous Dawn's reactor powered nearly every critical system aboard. Without it, everything failed. Life support, navigation, shields, communication, everything. Damage assessment? The officer hesitated, then spoke quietly. Catastrophic. Deep below the ship, Ethan arrived at Reactor Sector 9. Smoke filled the air. Engineers rushed in every direction. Emergency drones floated overhead. The situation looked terrible. The closer Ethan moved toward the reactor core, the worse it became. Damaged conduits sparked violently. Containment systems failed one after another. Several engineers argued near a control station. Ethan approached. "What happened?" One engineer laughed nervously. "What happened?" "The universe happened." Another pointed toward the reactor chamber. The containment field took a direct strike. Ethan looked through reinforced observation glass. His stomach tightened. The reactor core glowed unstable blue. Lightning-like energy erupted across containment rings. Temperature readings climbed every second. He immediately understood the danger. The reactor wasn't merely damaged. It was dying. And once the cascade reached critical mass, nothing would stop the explosion. A senior scientist entered the room. His face looked pale. Everyone turned toward him. "What is it?" The scientist swallowed, then delivered the worst news imaginable. "We've run the calculations." Nobody spoke. The scientist continued. "There is no recovery scenario. Silence, absolute silence. We cannot save the reactor." The words hit like a physical blow. Some engineers lowered their heads, others stared blankly. One woman simply sat down. The scientist continued. "Evacuation orders will begin shortly." Ethan looked back toward the reactor. Something about the numbers bothered him. The calculations, the damage patterns, the energy flow. Something felt wrong. Not impossible. Wrong. Like everyone had missed a detail. A very important detail, but before he could investigate further, another explosion shook the ship. The lights flickered, and somewhere deep inside the reactor chamber, a second containment ring failed. The countdown toward destruction had officially begun. The second containment ring failed with a sound that every engineer aboard the Valorous Dawn would remember for the rest of their lives. A deep metallic crack echoed through Reactor Sector 9. Then came the alarms. Louder, more urgent, more desperate. Red warning symbols flooded every display in the room. Containment failure cascade event. Detected reactor stability. 27%. Several engineers immediately started moving toward evacuation routes. Others simply stared at the screens in shock. The senior scientist closed his eyes. It's over. Nobody argued, because according to every model, every simulation, and every calculation available, he was right. The ship was dead. Except Ethan wasn't looking at the stability percentage. He was looking at something else, a small diagnostic display hidden among hundreds of readings. Most people would have ignored it. Most people already had. But Ethan kept staring. The energy feedback pattern didn't make sense. The reactor was behaving incorrectly. Not randomly. Incorrectly. Almost as if something inside the system wasn't responding the way it should. His eyes narrowed. Then he stepped toward a nearby terminal. A young engineer noticed. "What are you doing?" Ethan didn't answer. His fingers moved across the controls. Data streams appeared. More numbers, more diagnostics, more system reports. The engineer frowned. Human evacuation orders are coming. Still no response. The engineer grew irritated. "Did you hear me?" Ethan finally looked up. "Yeah, then let's go." Ethan pointed at the display. "What's that?" The engineer glanced at the screen. "A damaged regulator." "No." "What?" Ethan zoomed in. "That." The engineer leaned closer. His expression slowly changed. "Huh. Exactly. Huh." 3 minutes later, Chief Engineer Voren arrived. His silver skin looked exhausted. "What is it now?" Ethan pointed toward the display. "The energy bleed pattern." Voren frowned. "What about it?" "It shouldn't exist." The engineer stared at him. "Explain." Ethan tapped several readings. If the containment system was failing naturally, we'd see symmetrical energy loss. Voren nodded. "Correct. We don't." The engineer studied the data. His face slowly tightened. Ethan continued. "Something is redirecting energy." "That's impossible." "Maybe." Voren examined the readings again, and suddenly, he wasn't smiling anymore. Because Ethan was right. The numbers didn't make sense, not at all. For the first time since the attack began, hope appeared. Tiny, fragile, but real. Voren immediately ordered a deeper scan. Dozens of diagnostics flooded the network. Engineers stopped packing evacuation gear. Scientists returned to terminals. Within minutes, the room transformed. People who had already accepted death suddenly had a reason to fight again, and then the results arrived. The room fell silent. One engineer whispered, "No way." Another simply stared. The senior scientist grabbed the report, read it twice, then a third time. Because he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The reactor wasn't failing because of the enemy attack. Not entirely. Something else had happened. A microscopic stabilization. Controller hidden deep inside the containment system had malfunctioned during the battle. A component smaller than a human hand, a part worth less than 20 credits. That tiny device was causing 90% of the cascade reaction. The entire ship was dying because of a single failed controller. For a moment, everyone just stood there. Then celebration almost broke out, until the scientist raised his hand. "Wait." The room froze. "What?" The scientist swallowed. "The controller is located inside primary containment." Silence. Every face darkened again, because they all knew what that meant. The reactor chamber, the heart of the disaster. The hottest location aboard the ship. Temperatures exceeding survival limits, radiation levels reaching lethal thresholds, even protective suits would fail. No maintenance drone could survive long enough to complete repairs. No engineer could reach the controller and return alive. Hope disappeared almost instantly. Voren sighed. "So we're back where we started." The scientist nodded. Unfortunately, another engineer laughed bitterly. The universe really hates us. Nobody disagreed, except Ethan, because Ethan was still studying the reactor schematic, still thinking, still searching. Then he noticed something. A maintenance shaft. Old, forgotten, hidden behind secondary coolant systems. His eyes widened slightly. He checked the map again. Then again, and again. Finally he looked at Voren. "How old is this ship?" The engineer blinked. "What?" "Answer the question." 42 years. Ethan nodded. "Thought so." Voren frowned. "What are you talking about?" Ethan zoomed into an old section of the blueprint. A maintenance access route appeared. Most systems no longer used it. Most engineers didn't even know it existed. But Ethan had spent 7 years crawling through forgotten sections of the ship. He knew every corridor, every tunnel, every maintenance crawlspace. And suddenly, he saw a path, a terrible path, a dangerous path, but a path. The room grew quiet as Ethan explained. At first, nobody liked the idea. Then, nobody believed the idea. Then, nobody wanted to discuss the idea. Because it was insane, absolutely insane. The route passed through damaged coolant tunnels, partially collapsed maintenance shafts, and sections currently exposed to radiation leakage. Survival odds were terrible, maybe worse, yet it remained the only path capable of reaching the failed controller. The scientist shook his head. "No." Ethan looked at him. "No? It's suicide." "Probably." "Then we're not doing it." Ethan glanced toward the reactor. If nobody goes. He didn't need to finish. Everyone knew the ending. 8,000 people dead. Maybe more. The evacuation order finally arrived. The ship-wide announcement echoed through every deck. "Attention all personnel." The captain's voice sounded exhausted. "Full evacuation procedures are now authorized." A few engineers lowered their heads. Others quietly started gathering equipment. This was it. The end. They had done everything possible. Now survival depended on escape pods. Nothing more. Nothing less. Ethan looked around the room, at the scientists, the engineers, the frightened technicians. None of them were cowards. Not one. They were simply facing a problem nobody could solve. Then he remembered something his father had once told him, a lesson from long ago. When everyone says something is impossible, look closer, because sometimes impossible wasn't impossible. Sometimes it was just difficult. Very, very difficult. He quietly grabbed a toolbox. Voren immediately noticed. "What are you doing?" Ethan opened the lid, selecting tools carefully. A cutting torch, manual regulators, repair clamps, emergency sealant. The engineer's eyes widened. "Ethan!" The human continued packing. "Ethan!" No response. "Ethan!" Finally he looked up. Voren already knew the answer, and he hated it. "You can't be serious." Ethan smiled faintly. "Funny thing. This isn't funny." "No." The human closed the toolbox. "It's really not." The room watched him. Nobody spoke, because suddenly everyone understood. The human wasn't preparing equipment. He was preparing for the mission. His mission. The one nobody else wanted. The one nobody else could do. The scientist stepped forward. "You'll die." "Maybe. Those radiation levels—" "I know." "You don't understand." Ethan chuckled softly. "Trust me." His expression became distant, older, haunted. "I understand more than you think." For a brief moment, Voren felt something strange, a feeling he couldn't explain. The human standing before him no longer looked like a janitor. He no longer looked like maintenance staff. There was something else there, something hidden, something dangerous, something experienced, like a soldier preparing for another battlefield. The feeling disappeared as quickly as it arrived, but Voren never forgot it. Then the bridge transmitted new information, and suddenly the reactor wasn't the only problem anymore. The tactical officer's voice echoed across the emergency network. "Attention all departments." The message trembled slightly. "Multiple enemy boarding craft have breached the ship." Every face turned toward the speakers. The officer continued. Hostile forces are now aboard the Valorous Dawn. The room became silent. Then someone whispered, "Oh no," because if enemy troops reached the reactor before repairs were completed, everything would be lost. The ship, the crew, the passengers, all of it, and for the first time since the crisis began. Ethan's expression hardened, not with fear, not with panic, but with something much colder, something that hadn't appeared in years. The look of a man who had spent a lifetime surviving impossible situations. A look that made even Chief Engineer Voren uncomfortable, because suddenly he realized something. They might not actually know who Ethan Cole really was. And somewhere deep inside the burning ship, enemy soldiers were already moving toward the reactor. The enemy boarded the ship 12 minutes after the attack began. They came through shattered docking ports, through breached cargo bays, through maintenance access points hidden beneath the lower decks. Fast, organized, precise. This wasn't piracy. This wasn't random violence. This was a military operation, and someone had planned it very carefully. Inside Reactor Sector 9, the emergency network continued broadcasting updates. Hostile boarding teams detected on Deck 21. Security casualties reported. Deck 17 lost. Additional hostile contacts confirmed. The reports kept coming, each worse than the last. The ship was bleeding from the inside now. Chief Engineer Voren looked at Ethan. "Forget the reactor." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What?" "The boarding parties." Voren pointed toward a tactical display. "They're moving straight toward engineering." The realization spread across the room. The enemy wasn't randomly attacking. They wanted something, and whatever it was somewhere near the reactor. The senior scientist swallowed. "If they seize engineering, they control the ship," Voren finished. Nobody liked that answer because it was true. Whoever controlled engineering controlled everything. Power, navigation, life support, weapons, every critical system aboard the Valorous Dawn. Ethan studied the tactical map. Red markers advanced through the ship. Too fast, much too fast. Professional soldiers, not raiders, not criminals, soldiers. His eyes narrowed. Something about their movement felt familiar, efficient, disciplined, almost textbook. The kind of movement taught by experienced military instructors, the kind Ethan hadn't seen in years. Then another transmission arrived, this time from ship security. Security teams unable to contain hostiles. Gunfire echoed in the background. Screams followed. Then silence. The transmission ended. Nobody spoke. Everyone understood what that silence meant. The room suddenly shook. A nearby explosion rattled the walls. Dust fell from overhead pipes. Emergency lights flickered. Someone shouted, "They're getting closer." A young technician turned toward Ethan. "What do we do?" The question surprised everyone, including Ethan, because somehow, without realizing it, people had started looking toward him. Not the scientists, not the engineers. Ethan stared at the tactical display, calculating, estimating, predicting. Old instincts resurfaced, instincts he thought he'd buried forever. He hated that feeling, because every time those instincts returned, bad things followed. Very bad things. Voren noticed the change immediately. The human's posture had shifted. His eyes had changed. Even the way he stood felt different, like someone silently preparing for combat. The engineer frowned. "Who are you?" Ethan looked at him, then smiled. "Janitor." Nobody believed that answer anymore. The first hostile soldiers appeared 3 minutes later. Security cameras captured them moving through a nearby corridor. Tall, armored figures, dark combat suits, pulse rifles, advanced tactical equipment. Not pirates. Definitely soldiers, professional soldiers. One of the engineers looked terrified. "Security won't stop them." Nobody argued. The footage made that painfully obvious. The enemy moved with terrifying confidence, like they had done this 100 times before. Maybe they had. Then the captain's voice returned across the emergency network, this time sounding grim. "Attention all personnel." A pause, then words nobody wanted to hear. "Engineering sectors are no longer secure." Fear spread instantly, because engineering was the final line. If it fell, everything fell. The senior scientist turned toward Ethan. The repair mission is impossible now, Ethan said nothing. The boarding teams will reach the reactor before you do. Still nothing. Even if you fix the controller, they'll just take the ship. Silence. Then Ethan asked a question. How many boarders? Everyone blinked. The scientist frowned. What? How many enemy soldiers? Vorin checked the tactical report. Approximately 140. The room fell silent. Ethan simply nodded, as though he were evaluating weather conditions. Nothing more, nothing less. That reaction made everyone uncomfortable, because no normal janitor reacted that way. No normal maintenance worker heard 140 enemy soldiers and responded with calm curiosity. Something wasn't adding up. Then another explosion echoed through the ship, closer this time, much closer. A security officer burst into the room, bleeding, exhausted, terrified. They are coming! Everyone turned. The officer nearly collapsed. We lost Deck 10. His breathing was ragged. Security teams destroyed. The room went silent. Destroyed. Not defeated. Destroyed. The officer looked around desperately. Where's the evacuation route? Nobody answered, because they all knew there wasn't one anymore. Outside the reactor sector, gunfire erupted. Sharp bursts echoed through the corridors, then screams, more gunfire, then silence. The enemy had arrived. Panic exploded inside the room. Several technicians rushed toward emergency exits. Scientists grabbed data drives. Engineers started moving equipment. Everyone suddenly wanted to be somewhere else, anywhere else. Ethan didn't move. Instead, he calmly opened his toolbox. Vorin stared. What are you doing now? The human removed something wrapped inside old maintenance cloth, something nobody had ever seen before. Something Ethan had carried for 7 years, just in case. The cloth fell away. A pistol appeared, not a maintenance tool, not civilian equipment, a military sidearm, old, scratched, used, very used. The room froze. The security officer blinked. Why does a janitor have that? Nobody had an answer, not even Ethan. At least not one he wanted to explain. The human checked the weapon, loaded, functional, reliable. Good. Some things never changed. Then came the sound. Heavy boots approaching, dozens of them, the enemy, only seconds away. A terrified technician whispered, "We're dead." Another started crying. Someone else prayed. Ethan slowly stood, then picked up his toolbox. One hand held the pistol, the other carried the repair equipment. Vorin stared in disbelief. "You're still going?" Ethan looked toward the reactor access corridor, then toward the approaching enemy, then back toward the engineer. "Someone has to." The engineer stepped forward. "Ethan." The human paused. "What?" "If you don't come back." Vorin stopped, unable to finish. For a moment, Ethan smiled, a tired smile. The smile of a man who had already survived too many impossible days. Then he answered quietly, "Story of my life." The corridor doors exploded inward. Metal fragments flew across the room. Screams followed. Smoke filled the entrance. And through that smoke, the first enemy soldiers appeared, weapons raised, scanning for targets. What happened next lasted less than 3 seconds, but every witness would remember it forever, because the human janitor moved, and in that instant, he stopped looking like a janitor entirely. The first hostile raised his rifle. Ethan fired first. One shot, perfect hit. The soldier collapsed instantly. A second hostile turned. Ethan fired again, another perfect shot. The room froze in shock, not because Ethan had fired, but because of how he fired. No hesitation, no panic, no wasted movement. Every action precise. Controlled, efficient, deadly. The security officer whispered, "Oh stars," because suddenly everyone understood. The human had done this before, many times before. The third hostile entered the doorway. Ethan grabbed a maintenance wrench and threw it. The heavy tool struck the soldier's helmet with incredible force. The enemy crashed into the wall, stunned. Before he could recover, Ethan was already moving. Fast, much faster than anyone expected. The human disappeared into the smoke-filled corridor. Gunfire erupted seconds later. Then more gunfire, then shouting, then screaming, then silence. Nobody inside Reactor Sector 9 moved. Nobody spoke. They simply stared at the doorway, waiting, listening, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Finally, Voren broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "Who the hell is Ethan Cole?" No one knew, but somewhere inside the burning ship, enemy soldiers were learning the answer the hard way, and for the first time since the attack began. The hunters had become the hunted. The corridor looked like a war zone. Smoke filled the air. Emergency lights flashed red across twisted metal walls. Sparks rained from shattered conduits, and somewhere in the darkness, men were dying. Inside Reactor Sector 9, nobody moved. Everyone listened. Every few seconds, another burst of gunfire echoed through the corridor, then silence, then more gunfire, then another scream. The sounds kept getting closer, then farther away, then closer again. Nobody understood what was happening. Chief Engineer Voren cautiously approached a security monitor. His hands trembled slightly. The camera feed flickered. Static danced across the screen. Then the image stabilized. The room fell silent. The hallway outside engineering was littered with enemy soldiers. Bodies, weapons, armor, everywhere. At first, Voren thought security forces had somehow rallied. Then he noticed something. The enemy dead were scattered across 3 separate corridors. Ambush points, choke points, kill zones. Someone was deliberately funneling the attackers into traps. The engineer stared, because only one person had entered those corridors. One Ethan. Another camera activated. This one showed a maintenance junction 2 decks below. A group of enemy soldiers cautiously advanced, weapons raised, scanning every corner. Professional, careful, experienced. Then an overhead steam pipe exploded. Scalding vapor filled the corridor. The soldiers staggered. Visibility vanished. A second later, gunfire erupted from the smoke. Short bursts, precise bursts, controlled bursts. 3 soldiers dropped instantly. A 4th tried to return fire. Too slow. He fell moments later. The surviving enemies retreated. The camera briefly captured a figure moving through the steam. Blue maintenance coveralls, tool belt, human, gone again before anyone could get a clear look. The room watching the feed remained speechless. One technician finally whispered, "He's hunting them." No one disagreed, because that's exactly what it looked like. 3 decks away, Ethan moved through a narrow service tunnel. His breathing remained steady, his heartbeat calm, his mind focused. Years disappeared. Old memories returned. Old habits, old instincts. Things he had spent years trying to forget. A warning icon flashed on his wrist display. Multiple enemy contacts ahead. 12, maybe 15. Ethan crouched beside a maintenance panel. Opened it, studied the circuitry, then smiled slightly. Some things never changed. 30 seconds later, the enemy boarding team entered the junction, confident, organized, moving toward engineering. Then the lights went out, completely. Darkness swallowed the corridor. Enemy soldiers immediately activated helmet optics, exactly as Ethan expected. A massive power surge erupted through the maintenance grid, every optical system overloaded simultaneously. Blinding white flashes exploded inside their helmets. Confusion followed. Shouting disorientation, panic. Ethan emerged from the darkness. Fast, silent, relentless. The first soldier never saw him. The second barely reacted. The third managed to raise his weapon. Too late. Within seconds, the corridor was silent again. Ethan looked down at the fallen soldiers, then continued moving. No celebration, no hesitation, no emotion, only purpose. Back on the bridge, Captain Rellan stared at incoming reports. His tactical officer looked utterly confused. "Sir, what now?" the officer swallowed. "We've lost track of the enemy advance." Rellan frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means." The officer checked the display again. "It means they're disappearing." The bridge crew exchanged confused looks. Another officer spoke. "Security cameras show heavy casualties among hostile forces." Rellan leaned forward. "From who?" Nobody answered, because nobody knew. A few moments later, new footage arrived. The bridge watched a recording from Deck 11, 20 enemy soldiers advancing through a cargo junction. Suddenly, explosions erupted from both sides. The formation shattered. Confusion followed. Then a single human appeared from behind a cargo container. The footage lasted only 12 seconds. 12 seconds. 20 enemy soldiers neutralized. Silence filled the bridge. Captain Rellan stared at the screen. Then replayed it. Then replayed it again. Finally, he asked the question everyone was thinking. Who is that human? No one knew. Meanwhile, deep inside the ship, the reactor continued dying. Stability dropped to 21%, then 19, then 18. Time was running out. Ethan finally reached the entrance to the old maintenance shaft, the forgotten route he had discovered earlier. The path leading directly toward the failed stabilization controller. Radiation warnings immediately flooded his display. Dangerous levels, extremely dangerous levels. He expected that. What he didn't expect was the enemy commander waiting there. The alien stood nearly 8 feet tall. Black combat armor, energy blade, command markings, elite status. Several dead security officers lay nearby. The commander smiled. Interesting. Ethan remained silent. The alien studied him carefully. You are the one causing problems. Still silence. The commander laughed. I expected soldiers. His eyes narrowed. Not a maintenance worker. Ethan shifted his toolbox slightly. The commander noticed and smiled again. You know, the alien said. I've reviewed your personnel file. That got Ethan's attention. The commander continued. Janitor. A pause. Then, funny thing about that, the alien activated a holographic display. A classified document appeared. Old military restricted. Ethan's expression changed instantly. The commander saw it and smiled wider. There you are. The alien tapped the file. Former Earth Defense Force. Another file appeared. Special Operations Division. Another. 37 combat deployments. Another. Decorated war veteran. The corridor became very quiet, because the secret Ethan had hidden for 7 years was no longer a secret. The commander stepped forward. You weren't running from war when you became a janitor. Another step. You were hiding from it. Ethan's jaw tightened. The alien's smile vanished. Unfortunately for you, he activated his energy blade. Blue light filled the corridor. I found you. For several seconds, neither moved. The reactor alarms screamed in the distance. The ship trembled violently, and thousands of lives hung in the balance. Then the commander attacked. The energy blade moved with terrifying speed, fast enough to kill most opponents instantly, but Ethan wasn't most opponents. He dodged, barely. The blade struck the wall instead. Molten metal exploded outward. The commander attacked again and again and again. Ethan retreated toward the maintenance shaft, not because he was losing, because he was buying time. Every second mattered. Every second brought the reactor closer to destruction. The commander realized it. His eyes widened. You're trying to reach the reactor. Ethan smiled for the first time during the entire battle, a genuine smile. Then he answered. Finally figured it out, and before the commander could react, Ethan slammed an emergency bulkhead control. Massive steel doors dropped between them. The alien commander roared in fury. The doors wouldn't hold forever, maybe not even long, but Ethan didn't need forever. He only needed enough time to save the ship. Gripping his toolbox tighter, the former soldier turned toward the radioactive maintenance shaft, toward certain death, toward the reactor, toward the impossible. And as alarms echoed through the dying battlecruiser, Ethan Cole stepped into the tunnel that nobody else had the courage to enter, because if he failed now, 8,000 souls would die, and the valorous Dawn would become nothing more than burning debris drifting through space. The maintenance shaft was never meant for living beings. It had been built decades ago during the ship's original construction, narrow, unstable, dangerous. Even under normal conditions, most crew members avoided it. Now it had become a death trap. Radiation warnings flooded Ethan's visor, warning lethal exposure. Detected recommended evacuation immediately. He ignored them. The deeper he moved, the hotter the tunnel became. Metal walls glowed faintly orange. Emergency coolant pipes hissed around him. The air itself felt alive, angry, hostile. Behind him, distant impacts echoed through the ship. The enemy commander was trying to break through the bulkhead. Sooner or later, he would succeed. Ethan knew that, which meant he had very little time left. Ahead, the tunnel opened into a small maintenance chamber. Beyond it stood the reactor core, the heart of the disaster. For a moment, Ethan simply stared. The reactor looked like a dying star. Blue energy surged through damaged containment rings. Lightning-like arcs exploded across the chamber. Massive support structures groaned under impossible stress. Every alarm imaginable screamed simultaneously. The stabilization controller was visible, mounted along a damaged access frame, just as the scans had predicted. One tiny component, one failed device, one broken piece responsible for thousands of potential deaths. Ethan laughed softly. Of course. The universe had a strange sense of humor. He opened his toolbox, pulled out replacement components. Repair clamps. Diagnostic equipment, then climbed onto the access platform. Immediately, another containment surge erupted. The platform shook violently. Ethan nearly lost his balance. The reactor stability dropped again. 6% time was running out. Fast. Back in Reactor Sector 9. Chief Engineer Voran watched the numbers fall. Every engineer in the room looked terrified. Any sign of Ethan? No. Communications? Still down. The engineer clenched his fists. For the first time since meeting the human 7 years ago, he was genuinely afraid for him. Because deep down, Voran finally understood something. Ethan had never been maintenance staff. Not really. He had simply chosen to become one, and now he was risking everything for people who barely knew his name. Meanwhile, the enemy commander finally breached the emergency bulkhead. The massive alien stepped into the maintenance corridor, furious, determined, deadly. His tactical scanner immediately located Ethan's signal inside the reactor chamber. The commander smiled. Too late, human. Then he started running, back at the reactor. Ethan removed the damaged stabilization controller. The device crumbled in his hand, completely destroyed. No wonder the ship was dying. He reached for the replacement unit, then froze. Something was wrong, very wrong. A secondary diagnostic suddenly appeared. One hidden behind multiple system layers, one nobody had noticed before. Ethan stared, then cursed, because fixing the controller wouldn't save the ship. Not anymore. The damage had progressed too far. Even if the replacement worked perfectly, the reactor would still explode. Maybe not immediately, maybe not today, but soon. The cascade had already become self-sustaining. The realization hit like a punch. All this effort, all this sacrifice, and it still wouldn't be enough. For a moment, Ethan closed his eyes. Then he started looking for another solution. Because giving up wasn't an option. Not while 8,000 lives depended on him. Then he saw it. A possibility. Dangerous, ridiculous, almost certainly fatal, which meant it was probably the correct answer. The reactor could still be stabilized. But only if someone manually restarted the primary containment network from inside the core chamber itself. No remote access, no automation, no shortcuts. Someone had to physically activate it from the center of the reactor, where no one could possibly survive. Ethan laughed again. That's about right. At that exact moment, the chamber doors exploded inward. The enemy commander entered, energy blade glowing, murder in his eyes. You lose, human. Ethan looked over his shoulder. Bad timing, the commander charged. The energy blade sliced through metal supports. The reactor chamber shook violently. Ethan grabbed a maintenance rod, not because it was a good weapon, because it was the only weapon available. The fight was brutal. The alien commander was stronger, faster, better armed, but Ethan possessed something else, experience, the kind earned over decades, the kind purchased through survival. Every movement was efficient, every dodge calculated, every strike deliberate. The battle carried them across the chamber, closer and closer to the unstable reactor. Finally, the commander managed to knock Ethan to the floor. The energy blade pointed directly at his chest. Victory! The alien smiled. It's over. Ethan looked toward the reactor, then toward the containment controls, then back toward the commander, and smiled. The alien frowned. What? Ethan activated an emergency magnetic lock. Instantly, every metallic object in the chamber slammed toward the reactor housing, including the commander's armor. The alien was ripped sideways. Thrown violently against the containment frame, before he could recover, Ethan hit the manual containment switch. The reactor chamber sealed, locking the commander inside, locking Ethan inside, together. The alien's eyes widened. "You fool!" Ethan looked at the reactor. Maybe. Then he climbed toward the core platform. The commander finally understood. No, for the first time. Fear appeared in the alien's eyes, because he realized what the human intended to do. Ethan reached the final control station, placed both hands on the activation panel. The reactor screamed around him. Energy surged, metal groaned, reality itself seemed ready to tear apart. Then Ethan activated the sequence. Nothing happened. For one terrible second. Nothing. Then the containment network came alive. One ring activated. Then another. Then another. Blue energy stabilized. The violent surges weakened. The cascade slowed. Throughout the entire ship, alarms suddenly changed. Engineers stared at their displays. Nobody breathed. Reactor stability, 18%, 22%, 31%, 47%. Chief Engineer Voron's eyes widened. No way. The numbers continued climbing. 71%, 83%. Cheers erupted across Reactor Sector 9. People laughed, cried, hugged each other. The impossible was happening. The ship was surviving. The valorous Dawn was living. But one question remained. Where was Ethan? Back inside the reactor chamber. The human collapsed against the control station. The commander lay unconscious nearby. Radiation exposure warnings filled the room. Ethan's vision blurred. His body felt heavy. Very heavy. Then he smiled, because the reactor was stable. The ship was safe. And 8,000 people would live. That was enough, more than enough. Several hours later, medical teams finally reached the chamber. To everyone's shock, Ethan was still alive. Barely, but alive. 3 weeks later, the valorous Dawn entered orbit around Arcanis Prime once again. This time safely. A ceremony was held aboard the ship. Every crew member attended, every passenger, every officer. Captain Rellan stood before the crowd, then spoke the words heard across the entire vessel. Today, 8,000 people are alive because one human refused to quit. Applause thundered through the hall. The captain continued. When every expert declared the ship lost, when every calculation said failure was certain, when everyone else was preparing to abandon hope, he chose to fight. The crowd rose to their feet. A standing ovation for a janitor, or at least the man everyone had believed was a janitor. Chief Engineer Voron stepped forward, smiling. "You know," he said, "I finally read your military record." The crowd laughed. Ethan groaned. "That's unfortunate." More laughter followed. Then Voron handed him a new identification badge. Ethan examined it. His eyes widened. "Chief Engineering Consultant." The engineer nodded. "And your salary is officially 10 times higher." The crowd erupted again. Ethan stared at the badge, then smiled. "Best day I've had in years." The hall exploded with laughter, and somewhere beyond the stars, stories began spreading. Stories about a dying ship, a failed reactor, 8,000 lives, and one human janitor who accomplished the impossible. Because sometimes, the person everyone overlooks becomes the reason everyone survives. If you enjoyed this HFY story, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments, what would you have done if you were aboard the valorous Dawn when everyone else was abandoning ship? And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss the next HFY adventure. This HFY story is a work of fiction created for entertainment purposes only. All characters, events, species, organizations, and locations depicted in this story are fictional. Any resemblance to real persons, events, or organizations is purely coincidental.